A survey has revealed 80% of primary school leaders see anxiety as a significant issue within their schools. 90% of school leaders surveyed also stated that anxiety in students was placing major time and resources burdens on schools, with 60% of school leaders reporting that they had insufficient resources to deal with the issue.
Joining us live now is psychologist and child behaviour expert Michael Hawton. Those numbers, quite worrying.
Well, the numbers themselves represent the risk factors. They're not disorders per se. So when the leaders are talking about this, they're actually not talking about an anxiety disorder. They're just talking about the way in which children speak sometimes. They say, I'm worried or I'm anxious, or kids can avoid certain situations. That's what they're talking about.
So would you say then, Michael, that we're using the word anxiety too loosely?
Look, probably. There's an Australian psychologist called Nick Haslam who talks about this, and he says that he has this term called concept creep, and where he's saying that some big words that once had very clinical meanings, like anxiety and depression and even trauma and bullying, are being used at lower and lower thresholds, which means that the words have once had a very specific meaning, but they're used more generally, even by children at times.
The problem, Michael, and I'm going to talk personally here, and it's been a bit of a gripe of mine for a long, long time, has been the fascination with school, and particularly those final years of school, and how that is going to shape children's into adults' lives. And as we know, you look back and you say, well, really, how relevant was it? If you go on and you study medicine or law or whatever the case may be, sure, but it's nowhere near as important as some people make out, and that anxiety is passed on, often.
Oh, look, we know that about 1/3 of anxiety is genetic, in that it's, temperament and genes, and about 2/3 of anxiety is learnt. So kids listen to people around them. If people around them are catastrophising, or if they're using cognitive distortions like emotional reasoning, then what happens is that kids mimic that. They see it and they watch it and they mimic it, So part of the problem here is the adults, us adults around kids sometimes can contribute to that anxiety by the way that we react to certain events.
It's certainly not about blaming and shaming parents and everybody who's looking after our children with these increased anxiety levels, but we often talk about the higher expectations that we're under, the higher pressure, the broader amount of social media that we are, our children are experiencing, and a lot of it is age inappropriate. Could you give us, Michael, some examples to help parents with tips on how to alleviate some of this troubling anxiety that they're experiencing?
Well, I think the word insulate comes to mind. I mean, we shouldn't be Pollyanna about this. We can't insulate our children against every tragedy that occurs in the media. But I think it is important to be age appropriate with kids and to not involve them in conversations that really are beyond them to solve. That would be certainly my first tip. And then the other one would be to stop children when they use very dramatic language, like I'm never going to be any good, or I'm hopeless at this, and to have a conversation with them at that time to help them think more clearly and more accurately about what they're doing. So that'd be a couple of tips I'd give you.
Oh, that's great advice. How important is it to let kids be kids, Michael, to allow them to be, free-spirited, to allow them not to take on the burdens of the world? And it's much to your answer there about insulation.
Well, I think it is our responsibility as parents to not always be open slather in front of kids. They need to enjoy their childhood, and part of that is the environment that they grow up in. How can we make it easier for them and not burden them with responsibility for things that they can't solve? There are lots of things that have happened recently, stresses that have happened recently, and I suppose it really is up to parents to try and help kids to manage their anxiety, but not to expose them to too much as well.
I think it's important to always look at the positives in certain conditions as well. As you mentioned, there are obviously 1/3, I think you mentioned, of people that have a mental health issue being anxiety. But would you say there are some other words we could use, perhaps like deep thinkers or being cautious, that there are some positives to having a bit of anxiety?
Oh, absolutely. And having anxiety or our ability to perceive danger in the environment can be very helpful, and it's necessary for our survival apart from anything else. So there's appropriate caution, but then there are seeing things that don't exist. Like children sometimes avoiding challenges in life, like speaking in front of your peers, or doing things that stretch you a bit in your capacity, which are really important. And we as adults, teachers, and also adults, parents, need to help our kids take on life's challenges, because it's by the practice at taking on life's challenges that they actually build up resilience. And resilience is, you've got to do it. You've got to actually be involved in the events and help children to develop that capacity.
Great to have you on the show today. www.beyondblue.org.au. Look, I think that it's an opportunity for parents to educate as well, because there's not a lot of handbooks that are given out on parenting and taking children through it. So if we all learn together and help out, it's going to, be a real positive for the future. Thank you for coming on the show, Michael.
Sorry, just one
You're
more
very
thing,
welcome.
Michael.
Thanks
Can you give us your website, because you have your own website that has a lot of workshops and information as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. www.parentshop.com.au.
Parentshop.com.
Parentshop.com.au.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.